Hey everyone, I'm John Lee and welcome back to my channel. Alright, so today I want to talk about the results or analyze a little bit as to what happened in last week's by-election here in South Korea. Now, for those of you who have not really paid all that much attention, I'll just give you a real fast rundown. Last Wednesday, there was a by-election in Korea. There were several offices that were contested, and as expected, a lot of the conservatives won that election, which was considered as a quote-unquote bellwether election, which means that it was an election that was going to see just how popular the current government is, just how popular President Moon Jae-in and the ruling Minju Party is. And as it turns out, it wasn't really great news for the president or his ruling party. His party got trounced in the elections, and both of the Seoul's two major cities, Seoul and Busan, went over to the conservatives. Now, personally, I don't have all that much love for the conservatives or the progressives, and so I don't really have a dog in this race. But after this election was over, there was about some sort of analysis that was done, and it was revealed that a lot of younger Korean men in their 20s overwhelmingly supported the conservatives. And the question is why? Now, the thing is, this is politics, and what that means is that if you happen to agree with the reasons that are given, they are completely legitimate justifications. However, if you don't agree with those reasons, then they're just excuses. And so I'm not really going to say what I believe is correct or not. I just want to focus on just some key elements, not too many, because otherwise there would be no end to this video. Now, one of the things that was mentioned as to why so many men in their 20s supported the conservatives was because they were angry that women did not have to serve in the military. Now, women not serving in the military is not something new. It's been going on for decades, and we're going to talk about this just a little bit. Now, if you are a South Korean citizen and you happen to be a man between the ages of 18 to 35, you must serve in the military. In fact, mandatory military service is enshrined in our constitution. Article 39 of the South Korean constitution says that all citizens has the duty of national defense. Now, the emphasis there would be on all citizens because this is going to be the important sticking point. Because the constitution says that all citizens must serve, there have been a lot of complaints among a certain segment of the population that says that it is unfair that only men have to serve in the military. In Korea, if you are a woman, you don't have to serve in the military, unlike men. You can still serve if you choose to do so, it is completely voluntary, but you're not forced to. And this is something that has been brought up many times before. In fact, it's been brought up to the Supreme Court even. But here's the thing, just because the Constitution says one thing doesn't mean that everyone follows the letter of the law. And that's because South Korea has also another law called the Military Service Act. And according to that law, Article 3 says that all men, according to the Constitution, must serve in the military, but it is completely voluntary for women. Now, I'm sure that everyone can make their own judgments as to whether or not South Korea's Military Service Act is constitutional or not. But as far as the law is concerned, it doesn't really matter what us average people think. What really matters is what the Supreme Court thinks. And as far as the South Korean Supreme Court is concerned, nothing about the Military Service Act is unconstitutional. In fact, back in 2014, this case actually went all the way up to the South Korean Supreme Court and whether or not it was constitutional or not. And the South Korean Supreme Court ruled back in 2014 that women should not be forced to serve in the military. And I'm not really thrilled with the reason that the Supreme Court gave, but what the Supreme Court said in 2014 was that women just don't have the ability to reside in a military base as men are able to because women are just physiologically weaker and because women can also get pregnant. I'm not really thrilled about this reason, and I'm going to explain as to why. Now, I served in the South Korean Army from 2011 to 2013, and until just a month ago, I was in the South Korean Army Reserves. Now, while I was an active duty soldier, I served under several different female officers. In fact, my company commander, a captain, she was a woman. In fact, throughout most of the time that I'd known her, she was pregnant. And yes, eventually she had to go on maternity leave. But until she was forced to go on maternity leave, she was an integral part of the company. She led every single military drill that we had to be responsible for, and she never said a single word of complaint. And she wasn't the only female officer that I served under. There were other non-commissioned officers as well, NCOs. And they range from staff sergeants all the way up to master sergeants. And these women were badass. They put a lot of us boys to shame. And I know for a fact that this whole thing about women being physiologically weaker than men, while it might be generally true, it's not always true. There are always exceptions. And to think that women are just weaker than men and therefore cannot serve in the military, I think that that decision that the Supreme Court made in 2014 was very sexist and myopic. If there were any other reasons to support not including women in the draft, in the conscription service, I might have been okay with it, but the reason that the Supreme Court gave was just not kosher with me. Anyway, the point is that if you're a South Korean man and you're able-bodied and sound of mind, you have to serve in the military. But unlike men, that same rule does not apply to women, and that has caused a lot of people to be irate. Now, let's go back to what I said earlier about the election. A lot of men in their 20s overwhelmingly supported the conservative candidates, and one of the reasons that was given was because of how difficult it is for men to get jobs, and this is something that's related to the army. When a lot of people in their prime, quote unquote, have to serve 2 years in the military, well, it's not exactly 2 years now, it's a year and a half, it's 18 months, it's seen as a waste of resources, a waste of time. When people are in their early 20s, when they're just starting to go through college, when they're just graduating, and when they're at the peak energy and strength, this should be the time when people really make fundamental decisions as to what kind of direction their life will go into in the future. They are going to have to choose careers, and in order to choose what kind of jobs that they want to get into, they have to go to the right school, they have to study the right subjects, they have to make a lot of decisions that will affect the rest of their lives. And the argument that is made by some portion of the male population in Korea is that it is unfair that men have to serve a year and a half in the military and basically just waste away their potential, while in the meantime, the women who don't have to serve in the military, they're still civilians, and they're the ones who are getting ready for their jobs. They're the ones who are going to college, and they're the ones who are padding their resumes with various experiences and internships and various certificates. And by the time that the men get done with their military service and decide to enter the workforce, that they're put into a disadvantage when they're competing against female competitors. And so that's the major argument that is made, that in order to level the playing field, in order to make it fair, some segment of the Korean male population are insisting that women have to serve in the military because that would only be fair. Now, that's their argument, and it's not an argument that I happen to agree with. Now, I want to point out that the reason that I oppose forcing women to serve in the military has got nothing to do with thinking that women are physiologically weaker than men or that they can get pregnant. As I said, I served in the military, I served under female officers. I know for a fact, I have first-hand experience to say without a shadow of a doubt that the female officers that I served under were badass and that they made us look like boys sometimes. Women are not physiologically weaker than men. As long as they get the proper training, they can do the job as well as men. So why do I oppose it? Well, I oppose it for the larger social justice reasons. Now, we have to explain. We have to actually look at this whole argument more holistically. If we just look at this argument myopically, if we divorce it from all other things, and if we just look at this one particular topic as to whether or not it is fair for only men to serve and for women to be excluded, then yes, the people who say that women should be forced to serve have a point. It would be unfair if we only look at it myopically and divorced from everything else. But that's not the way the world works. In the real world, everything is interconnected. And if we look at other facets of reality, of the way the world works, by forcing women to serve in the military, it would do them a great disservice, and it would just make the gender disparity and fairness even worse. And to explain, we need to talk about different subjects like employment discrimination, about maternity leave, about the gender wage gap. Now, these are all very complicated topics, and so I don't expect to really dive into it too much. After all, this is just a YouTube video, but I will just breeze through some of these things. Now, like in most other countries in the world, men and women in South Korea start working when they're in their 20s. Now, for us men, it's a little simple. We start working in our 20s, and unless something significant or unforeseen happens, we stay working until we reach our retirement age. The same is not true for women. Women work start working in their 20s, but once they reach their 30s, they start to leave the workforce. And that's because by this point, they've gotten married and have gotten kids. Now, whether it is fair or not, whether it is sexist or not, it is widely seen as the woman's role to raise the child, to raise the family. Now, we'll get into the patriarchal or the economic reasons later, but for now, let's focus on what we were talking about, the women leaving their workforce once they're in their 30s. Now, they stay home and to raise the kids, but starting when they're in their 40s, when the kids have grown up just enough, when the kids are old enough to go to school or what have you, then the women re-enter the workforce. And then they work for a while until they reach the retirement age and leave. And so that's what we call an M graph. The women start working in their 20s. Once they're in their 30s, they start to leave. And then once they're in their 40s, they start to go up again. And once they hit the retirement age, they go down again. The M graph. Now, like I said, there are many reasons as to why women happen to leave the workforce in their 30s. Now, we just touched upon the patriarchal reason. Yeah, it is the quote unquote women's role to raise the child. Now, not everyone, of course, sees the world in those kinds of patriarchal hues. There are some people who actually do this because it's the rational thing to do. And by rational, I mean we have to look at it from the gender wage gap perspective. Now, South Korea has one of the largest gender wage gaps among the OECD nations. I believe it was around 36% or so. And now, if you are an economically literate person, you're probably going to come back to me and say that the gender wage gap doesn't necessarily mean that a woman gets paid 36% less than a man. It just happens to mean that because of societal pressures or expectations or what have you, men take certain jobs, women take certain jobs, and those different jobs paid differently. For one reason or another, women get paid less than men because of those different choices in jobs. And yes, that is the definition of a gender wage gap. It does not necessarily mean that a woman who gets the same job as a man would necessarily get paid 36% less than a man would get paid. That's not what it means. But because of that 36% wage gap, regardless of what it means or what it doesn't mean or how we really define it, what really matters is that when a man and a woman are married and they have kids, someone needs to stay home to raise the child. And because the woman happens to get paid less because of whatever job that she chose, it is the rational choice to make for the woman to stay home because the man is the one who's going to get paid more money. And so, because of that, a lot of women happen to leave the workforce when they're in their 30s. Now, this M graph that defines a lot of women's career trajectory is not unknown to corporations. And so, whenever a corporation has a choice between hiring a man or a woman, the corporation will almost likely will prefer to choose the man because they know that at a certain point the woman is going to have to leave the workforce. She's going to get pregnant, she's going to have to raise a kid, they're going to have to guarantee maternity leave or what have you. And for a lot of corporations, they see that as wasted potential. And so they don't want to spend a lot of money hiring a woman to do a job that they know that she won't be able to do long term. They prefer to hire a man who they know will stay around for a longer period of time. And because of this, women have already got this inherently built-in discrimination that is placed against them. And so a lot of women face employment discrimination because of the fact that they are women. So even if we just look at these two things, the M graph and the gender wage gap, it becomes quite clear that the argument put forward that men having to serve with the military and women not having to serve puts men at a disadvantage is utter bunk. Women are at a significant disadvantage when it comes to employment discrimination. But obviously, that's not the only thing that we have to consider. Another thing that we have to consider is the fact that women are the victims of sexual abuse, harassment, and assault on a daily basis, something that men don't ever have to face. Now, back in 2016, a novel was made a bestseller, and that novel was Kim Ji-young, born 1982. This book sold about 1 million copies in Korea alone, and it was a book that described the everyday sexism that women have to face. And a lot of people got angry about the publication of this book, and a lot of the people who got angry were, of course, men. And the men who were very angry about this book were saying that it painted all men in a negative light, that it painted Korea as this backward and misogynistic society. And it really is. There's a reason that this book resonated with so many people. And when some celebrities or singers happen to promote this book, they got threatened. They had their albums burned in public. They were denigrated online. It got really ugly. And then in 2018, South Korea's Me Too movement exploded. And that was because back then, a South Korean prosecutor, her name was Yeon, she publicly accused some of her superiors of sexually groping her. And she said that she tried to lodge her complaint through proper channels, but that none of her superiors actually took her seriously because, it's the good old boys club. They don't want to rock the boat. And so when Yeon made this public announcement accusing her superiors of sexually groping her, things got really heated. And that's because if someone who is as powerful as a prosecutor can be the victim of sexual harassment, then what does it say about other Korean women who live in every other aspect of daily life who are not as powerful as a prosecutor? Then what does that say about them? And things just got bigger and bigger. Women started to accuse their teachers, their professors, their colleagues, their bosses of these heinous acts. And that is why we know for a fact that women face all this kind of discrimination that men don't ever have to face. So yes, if we go back to the topic of men and women being both equally forced to serve in the military, then yeah, it makes sense that if we just only look at that topic and nothing else, then it makes sense to say that women should serve in the military to make everything fair. But if we look at all of the other disadvantages, all of the discriminations that women face on a daily basis, and then add military service on top of that, does that really make things fair for men, or does that just put women at a more severe disadvantage that they already have to face already? My belief is that it's more the latter than the former. Now, that is reason number one as to why I disagree with forcing women to serve in the military. Reason number two is shorter and more to the point. Now, I served in the military for 21 months as an active duty soldier and for 8 years as a reservist. I'm proud of my service. I'm proud that I served my country. But it doesn't change the fact that I did not volunteer to serve. I was conscripted, and I believe that forcing people to serve in the military is morally wrong. I believe that the military ought to be an all-volunteer service. Now, when I served, I got paid on average about $100 a month. Now, can you imagine getting paid $100 a month to serve in the military and being told that if a war breaks out, you will more than likely be one of the first to die, and thanks for your service, but here's $100 a month for that? That is an immoral amount of pay for a service that has been rendered immorally. I believe that people should choose to serve in the military, and I believe that their pay ought to be reflective of that choice and to be competitive with the private sector. I believe that a soldier's pay ought to be similar to, or at least around the ballpark of what a person would make if he or she was a civilian and working for a corporation like, I don't know, Samsung or Google or what have you. But the fact that I was forced to serve in the military and got paid about $100 a month, that is wrong. It is morally wrong. And if you see something that is morally wrong, the thing that you should do that makes sense is to oppose the immoral act and not to say, oh, because I'm the victim of that immoral act, other people should be victims of it too. That's not the way justice works. That's not the way progress works. And the fact that there are so many people who would rather see others forced into the same predicament, into the same immoral quagmire that they're in, as opposed to fighting against this injustice, I believe that that is a gross and unjust position to take. And that is why I believe that forcing women to serve in the military is just outright wrong. Now, going back to the young men in their 20s voting overwhelmingly conservative. Now, that is just one aspect that I talked about. There is a lot more stuff to dig through, but like I said, if we did that, it would take too much time. And so I think regarding those other reasons or other excuses or what have you as to why so many men decided to turn conservative, I think that's going to be a topic that we're going to be talking about on a different day. But I think this is a good place to stop this video. Alright, so if you like this video, don't forget to click on the like, subscribe, and the bell button. And if you want, leave a comment. I'll read it and I might even reply. Alright, I'm John Lee and I'll see you all next time. Bye.